Martha Henderson stood on her wooden porch and looked at the dark clouds in the sky. The wind was getting stronger, and she could smell rain coming. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried not to cry. 3 months had passed since her husband Tom died from a bad sickness in his lungs. 3 months of trying to keep their small ranch running all by herself. The ranch was not big, but it had been their dream. Tom had worked so hard to build their little house, the barn, and the fence around their land. Now Martha was alone with 20 cows, a few chickens, and problems that seemed to grow bigger every day. The worst problem was the barn roof. It had holes in many places, and when it rained, water poured inside. Her hay was getting wet and starting to rot. Without good hay, her cows would not have enough food for the winter. Martha walked to the barn and looked up at the roof. She could see the sky through several big holes. Tom had always said he would fix it when he had time, but then he got sick. Now winter was coming fast, and she had no money to pay someone to fix it. She had already sold her wedding ring and her mother's silver spoons to buy food and medicine when Tom was dying. The bank man, Mr. Peterson, had visited last week. He wore a fancy suit and had cold eyes. He told Martha she owed $300 on the ranch loan. If she could not pay by Christmas, the bank would take her land. Christmas was only 2 months away. Martha did not know where she could find that much money. She sat down on an old wooden box and put her head in her hands. Maybe she should give up and move to town. Her sister Lucy lived there and had offered Martha a small room in her house. But Martha did not want to live on charity. This ranch was all she had left of Tom and their dreams together. A sound made her look up. A man on horseback was coming down the dirt road toward her house. Martha stood up quickly and smoothed her dress. She did not get many visitors these days. Most people in town felt sorry for her, but they had their own problems to worry about. The rider came closer, and Martha could see he was a cowboy. His clothes were old and had many patches. His hat was faded from the sun, and his boots had holes in them. The horse he rode looked tired and walked with a small limp. When the man reached her gate, he stopped and took off his hat politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said in a quiet voice. "My name is Jake Sullivan. I was wondering if you might have some work for a man willing to do anything for a hot meal." Martha looked at him carefully. He was thin, maybe too thin. His face was dirty from traveling, but his eyes were kind. She could tell he had not eaten good food in a long time. Something about him reminded her of a lost dog that had once showed up at their door. Tom had fed that dog, and it had stayed with them for 3 happy years. "What kind of work can you do?" Martha asked. Jake put his hat back on and looked around. "The ranch. I can fix fences, take care of animals, chop wood, or repair buildings. I have done many different jobs, ma'am." "I am not afraid of hard work." Martha thought for a moment. She did not have money to pay him, but she did have some food left. "I might have a meal for you if you can look at my barn roof and tell me how bad it really is." Jake nodded and tied his horse to the fence post. The horse immediately started eating the grass near the gate. Jake walked with Martha to the barn, and she pointed up at the holes in the roof. "My husband was going to fix it before he died," she explained. "Now I need to know if it can be patched or if the whole thing needs to be replaced." Jake studied the roof for a long time. Then he found a ladder and climbed up to look more closely. Martha watched nervously as he walked carefully across the old wooden boards. Some of them bent under his weight, and she was afraid he might fall through. After 20 minutes, Jake climbed back down. His face was serious, and Martha's heart sank. She could tell the news was not good. "Ma'am, I have to be honest with you," Jake said slowly. "This roof cannot be patched. Too many boards are rotten, and the frame underneath is weak. The whole roof needs to be torn off and built new." Martha felt tears start in her eyes. "How much would that cost?" Jake looked uncomfortable. "For materials and labor, probably around $200, maybe more. It would take at least 3 weeks of work, maybe 4. $200. Martha almost laughed, but not because anything was funny. She did not have $20, let alone 200. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for looking." Jake could see how sad she was. He had been traveling for 2 years, moving from ranch to ranch, doing whatever work he could find. He had seen many people struggling to survive, but something about this woman touched his heart. Maybe it was the way she tried to be brave even when things looked hopeless. Maybe it was how she had offered him food even though she clearly had very little. "Ma'am," Jake said suddenly, surprising himself with his own words, "I would like to make you an offer." Martha looked up at him with tired eyes. "What kind of offer?" Jake took a deep breath. He was about to say something crazy, something he had never done before. "I will fix your roof completely, make it strong and waterproof. You do not have to pay me anything until your ranch starts." Making money again, Martha stared at him. "I do not understand. Why would you do that?" Jake looked at his worn boots and then back at her face. "Because you offered food to a hungry stranger. Because this roof needs fixing and I know how to fix it. Because sometimes a person has to do what is right even when it does not make sense." "But what if my ranch never makes money? What if I lose it to the bank?" Jake shrugged. "Then I will have spent my time helping someone who needed help. That does not seem like a waste to me." Martha felt something she had not felt since Tom died. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was real. "I can give you meals and a place to sleep in the old bunkhouse," she said slowly. "But I cannot promise anything else." "That is all I need," Jake said with a smile. "When can I start?" As the first drops of rain began to fall, Martha led Jake to the small building where ranch hands used to sleep when Tom hired help during busy seasons. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a chair, and a small stove for heat. That night, as rain poured through the holes in her barn roof, Martha lay in her bed and wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. She knew nothing about this strange cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, but Tom had always said that sometimes you had to take chances in life. Maybe this was one of those times. In the bunkhouse, Jake listened to the rain and thought about what he had just promised. He had enough money for maybe 3 days of food, and winter was coming. But something told him he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, Martha woke up to the sound of hammering. She looked out her window and saw Jake already working on the barn roof in the early morning light. He had found some old boards and was carefully removing the rotten pieces. Steam rose from his coffee cup, which sat on a fence post nearby. Martha quickly got dressed and walked outside. "You started very early," she called up to him. Jake looked down and touched his hat. "Yes, ma'am, I like to work when it is cool. The sun gets hot later in the day." He climbed down the ladder and wiped his hands on his pants. "I make coffee if you would like some." "I hope you do not mind that I used your kitchen." "Of course not," Martha said. She was surprised by how polite he was. Most cowboys she had met were rough and loud. Jake spoke quietly and always said "ma'am." When he talked to her, they sat on the porch steps and drank coffee together. Martha had made biscuits and eggs for breakfast, and Jake ate like he had not seen food in days. Probably because he had not. "Where did you learn to build things?" Martha asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. "My father was a carpenter back east. He taught me how to work with wood when I was young." He did not say more, and Martha did not ask. Everyone had secrets, and she respected his privacy. After breakfast, Jake went back to work. Martha watched him throughout the day as she did her own chores. He worked steadily and carefully, never rushing or taking breaks except to drink water. By evening, he had removed all the old, rotten boards from one section of the roof. The next day, Jake surprised Martha by asking to borrow her wagon. "I need to go to town to look for materials," he explained. "I know where I might find some good used lumber." Martha was worried. What if he took her wagon and never came back? But she had already decided to trust him, so she gave him the wagon. And her old horse, Molly. Jake returned that evening with a wagon full of wooden boards, nails, and tar paper. Martha could not believe her eyes. "How did you pay for all this?" Jake smiled. "I did not pay money. I worked for Mr. Jenkins at the lumber yard all day. He let me take these materials in exchange for fixing his loading dock. Most of these boards were going to be thrown away anyway." Martha realized that Jake was not just fixing her roof. He was being very smart about how he got the materials. Over the next few days, she watched him make deals all over town. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's front steps in exchange for tar paper. He repaired the preacher's wagon wheel for a bag of nails. He helped the blacksmith's shoe horses for metal brackets. Word began to spread around town about the mysterious Cowboy who was working for the widow Henderson. Some people thought Martha was crazy to trust a stranger. Others admired Jake's work ethic and honesty. "That cowboy of yours is something special," said Mrs. Chun, who ran the general store. She had come to buy eggs from Martha's chickens. "He fixed my broken shelf yesterday and would not take any money for it. Said he was just being neighborly." Martha felt proud when people said good things about Jake, though she was not sure why. He was not her cowboy. He was just a man helping her out of kindness. After 2 weeks of work, the barn roof was taking shape. Jake had built a strong frame and was starting to put on the new boards. He worked even when it was raining, covering the open sections with old canvas to keep the inside dry. One evening, Martha brought him dinner in the barn. She found him reading a book by lantern light. She was surprised because most cowboys she knew could not read very well. "What are you reading?" she asked. Jake closed the book quickly, looking embarrassed. "Just an old book I carry with me." "Nothing important." Martha had seen the title before he closed it. It was a book about building and architecture, with pictures of beautiful buildings. This made her curious about Jake's past, but she did not ask questions. They ate dinner together in the barn, sitting on hay bales. The new roof made the space feel cozy and safe. Martha realized she enjoyed having someone to talk to in the evenings. She had been lonely since Tom died, though she tried not to think about it. "Why are you really doing this?" Martha asked suddenly. "I mean, helping me when you get nothing for it." Jake was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I have been traveling for 2 years, working at different ranches and farms. I have seen a lot of people who needed help but could not afford to pay for it. I always wished I could do more." He looked at her with serious eyes. "When I saw your barn and heard your story, I realized this was my chance to actually help someone. In a big way. But you need money too. You need to think about your own future." Jake shrugged. "I have been poor for 2 years. A few more months will not hurt me. Besides, I like this work. It feels good to build something that will last." The next week brought the first snow. It was light, just a dusting on the ground, but it reminded everyone that winter was coming fast. Jake worked longer hours, trying to finish the roof before. The weather got too cold. Martha began to worry about Jake. He was getting thinner, and she could see he was tired. She started making bigger meals and insisting he take breaks. When he got a bad cough from working in the cold, she made him hot soup and tea with honey. "You need to take care of yourself," she scolded him. "I do not want you getting sick because of my roof." Jake was not used to someone worrying about him. It felt strange, but also nice. "I am fine, ma'am. Just a little cold." But Martha could see he was not fine. His clothes were not warm enough for the weather, and he did not have good boots for walking in snow. That evening she brought him a heavy coat that had belonged to Tom. "I want you to have this," she said. Tom would have wanted someone to use it. Jake held the coat carefully. It was made of thick wool and lined with flannel. It was the nicest coat he had owned in years. "I cannot take this, ma'am. It was your husband's." "Tom always said we should help people when we can," Martha replied firmly. "You are helping me, so I want to help you. Please take it." Jake put on the coat. It fit almost perfectly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I will take good care of it." As Martha walked back to her house that night, she realized something had changed. She no longer thought of Jake as just a stranger helping her out. She was starting to think of him as a friend. Maybe the first real friend she had made since moving to this lonely place. In the bunkhouse, Jake wore the warm coat and thought about Martha's kindness. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about his well-being. For the first time in 2 years, he was not eager to move on to the next town. He was starting to feel like maybe he belonged here. By the middle of November, Jake had finished the roof completely, but he did not stop working. Martha woke up one morning to find him reinforcing the barn walls and building better stalls for the animals. When she asked him about it, he just said, "As long as I am here, I might as well do the job right." The new barn was becoming something special. Jake had skills that went far beyond simple carpentry. He carved beautiful patterns into the wooden beams and built storage areas that made the best use of every bit of space. He even created a loft area where Martha could store extra hay and grain. People from town started coming just to look at the barn. Word had spread that the widow Henderson's hired man was building something amazing. Ranchers and farmers came to see the work and asked Jake questions about his techniques. "I have never seen craftsmanship like this," said Mr. Wilson, who owned the biggest ranch in the county. "Where did you learn to build like this?" Jake just smiled and said, "Here and there, sir. You pick things up as you go." But Martha was starting to notice things about Jake that made her curious. He used words that most cowboys did not know. He could do mathematics in his head when figuring measurements. Sometimes she caught him looking at her books, though he always pretended he was just working when she came near. One day, Mrs. Patterson from town asked if she could hold her daughter's wedding reception in the barn. "It is the most beautiful building for miles around," she explained, "and it is big enough for all our family and friends." Martha looked at Jake, who was working nearby. He nodded and said, "The barn should be used for happy occasions, ma'am. That is what buildings are for." The wedding reception was a great success. People danced on the smooth wooden floor Jake had built, and everyone admired the high ceiling and strong beams. The barn felt warm and welcoming, even though it was cold outside. After that, more people asked to use the barn for special events. The preacher asked if he could hold church services there when the weather was too bad for people to travel to the town church. The school teacher wanted to have the Christmas program there because it was bigger than the schoolhouse. Jake seemed happy when people gathered in the barn. He would make sure everything was clean and ready, then disappear into the background. Martha noticed he never joined the celebrations, but he always watched from a distance with a small smile on his face. One evening, after a particularly large church service, Martha found Jake sitting alone in the barn. Most of the people had gone home, and the building was quiet except for the sound of wind outside. "You did a wonderful thing here," Martha said, sitting beside him on a hay bale. "This barn brings people together." Jake looked up at the beams he had carved with such care. "I used to think that buildings were just practical things, places to keep animals or store grain. But this barn has shown me something different." "What do you mean?" "Buildings can hold more than just things," Jake said thoughtfully. "They can hold memories, friendships, hope. When people gather here, they are not just using a building, they are creating something together." Martha studied Jake's face in the lamplight. There was something deep and thoughtful about him that she had not seen in other men she knew. "You talk like someone who has thought about these things before." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have had a lot of time to think in the past few years." "Maybe too much time." The next week, something unexpected happened. A man from the county newspaper came to see the barn. His name was Thomas Wright, and he had heard about the remarkable building and the cowboy who built it for free. "I would like to write a story about this barn and what you have done here," he told Jake. "People need to hear good news once in a while." Jake looked uncomfortable. "I do not think that is a good idea, sir. I'm just a man who fixed a roof." But Thomas Wright was a good reporter, and he could see there was more to the story. He talked to people in town and learned about all the work Jake had done for others. He heard about the lumberyard dock, Mrs. Patterson's steps, and the preacher's wagon wheel. He discovered that Jake had helped at least a dozen families with various problems, never asking for payment. "This cowboy is not just fixing buildings," Thomas Wright told Martha. "He is fixing this whole community." When the newspaper story came out, it spread beyond the local area. Other newspapers picked up the story and printed it in different towns across the territory. People began to hear about the cowboy saint who was rebuilding communities one barn at a time. Letters started arriving at Martha's ranch. Some were from people who wanted to thank Jake for inspiring them. Others contained money for Martha to help save her ranch. A few offered Jake jobs in distant places. Martha brought the letters to Jake, who read them with a worried expression. "I did not want this attention," he said. I just wanted to fix your roof, but look at what happened, Martha replied. People are being kind to each other because of your example. Is that not a good thing? Jake was not sure. He had reasons for wanting to stay unknown, reasons he had not shared with Martha. But he could see that the story was making people happy and giving them hope. The biggest surprise came when a wealthy rancher from Colorado sent a letter with $500 inside. He wrote that Jake's story had reminded him of his own struggles when he was starting out, and he wanted to help Martha save her ranch. Martha stared at the money with tears in her eyes. It was enough to pay off her bank loan and have money left over for supplies and improvements. I cannot believe this, she whispered. Jake looked at the letter and money with mixed feelings. He was happy for Martha, but he knew this meant his work here was done. With her ranch saved, she would not need him anymore. It was time for him to move on, as he always did. That night, Martha knocked on the door of the bunkhouse. Jake invited her in and made tea for both of them. I suppose you will be leaving soon, Martha said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake nodded slowly. The roof is finished, and your ranch is saved. You do not need me anymore. Martha felt a sadness she had not expected. Over the past 2 months, she had grown used to having Jake around. She enjoyed their conversations and felt safer knowing he was nearby. The ranch would feel empty without him. Where will you go? She asked. I do not know yet. Maybe north to Montana or west to California. There are always ranches that need work. They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about the changes that were coming. Neither wanted to admit how much they would miss each other. Finally, Martha stood up to leave. Whatever your reasons for wandering, Jake Sullivan, I hope you find what you are looking for. Jake watched her walk back to the house and wondered if he had already found what he was looking for, right here in this place. But he had learned long ago that good things did not last for men like him. 3 days before Jake planned to leave, Thomas Wright returned to the ranch with more questions. He had been investigating Jake's background and had discovered something interesting. I have been writing to people back east, Thomas said to Martha. When Jake was not around? I think your cowboy friend is not telling you everything about himself. Martha felt defensive. Jake has a right to privacy. He has been nothing but honest and helpful. I am not saying he is dishonest, Thomas replied carefully. But I think you should know that Jake Sullivan was once a student at Harvard Seminary. In Boston, he was studying to become a minister. Martha stared at Thomas in shock. Jake, a seminary student? It seemed impossible, yet it explained so many things. His education, his thoughtful way of speaking, his skill with building and design. What happened? Martha asked. Why did he leave? Thomas shook his head. That part of the story I could not find out. He left suddenly in 1885, and no one knows where he went, until now. That evening, Martha struggled with what to do. Should she tell Jake what she knew? Should she pretend she had never heard this information? She decided to give Jake a chance to tell her himself. She found him in the barn, packing his few belongings into a worn leather bag. Jake, she said softly, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will be honest with me. Jake looked up, and something in her voice made him stop packing. What is it, ma'am? Thomas Wright thinks he knows who you really are. He says you were studying to be a minister back east. Is that true? Jake's face went pale. He sat down heavily on a hay bale and put his head in his hands. For a long moment he did not speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of pain. Yes, he said quietly. It is true. I was at Harvard Seminary for 3 years. I was going to be ordained as a minister next spring. What happened? Why did you leave? Jake was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to tell Martha the story he had never told anyone. I had a younger sister named Rebecca. She was the sweetest, kindest person you could imagine. When I was at seminary, she got consumption. The doctors said she needed to go to a special hospital in California where the air was better. Martha sat down beside him, sensing this was a painful story. The hospital cost a lot of money, Jake continued. More than my family had. I went to the church leaders and asked for help. These were wealthy men who talked about Christian charity every Sunday. But when I asked them to help save my sister's life, They said the church money was for more important things. Jake's voice became bitter. They were building a new stained glass window that cost 3 times what Rebecca needed. They said the window would inspire people for generations, but they would not help one sick girl. What happened to Rebecca? Martha asked gently. She died that winter. I held her hand as she took her last breath, knowing that she could have been saved if those men had cared more about people than about pretty windows. Martha felt tears in her eyes. She could understand now why Jake had left everything behind. I lost my faith that day, Jake said. Not in God, but in the church and in myself. How could I preach about love and charity when I had seen how empty those words could be? So I left Boston and came west. I thought maybe I could find God again out here, or maybe I could find a reason to keep living. And did you? Martha asked softly. Jake looked at her with eyes that seemed to see right into her soul. I found something better. I found you. The words hung in the air between them. Martha felt her heart beating faster. She had known for weeks that her feelings for Jake had grown beyond friendship, but she had not dared to hope he felt the same way. Martha, Jake said, using her first name for the first time. I know I have no right to ask this. I'm just a wandering cowboy with no money and a broken past. But these months with you have been the happiest of my life. I do not want to leave. Martha reached out and took his hands. They were rough from work, but gentle in their touch. Then do not leave, but I have nothing to offer you. No money, no land, no future, Martha smiled through her tears. You built me the most beautiful barn in the territory. You saved my ranch. You brought my community together. You showed me that there are still good men in this world. That seems like quite a lot to me. Jake pulled her closer, and Martha did not resist. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Will you marry me, Martha Henderson? Jake asked, even though I am not the man I used to be. You are exactly the man I want you to be, Martha replied. Yes, Jake Sullivan. I will marry you. They decided to wait until spring for their wedding, giving people time to travel if they wanted to attend. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the community, and most people were delighted. Martha was well-liked, and Jake had earned respect through his hard work and kindness, but not everyone was happy about the news. Mr. Peterson, from the bank, was suspicious of Jake's past. Some of the town's more proper ladies thought Martha was making a mistake marrying a drifter. You hardly know anything about him, warned Mrs. Carmichael, the banker's wife. What if he is running from the law? What if he leaves you once he gets? Tired of ranch life? Martha listened politely to the concerns, but she did not let them change her mind. She knew Jake better than these people realized. She had seen his character tested every day for months. She knew he was a man who kept his promises and cared more about others than himself. The winter months passed quickly. Jake continued to improve the ranch, building better fences and repairing the house. Martha taught him about managing cattle and keeping books for the business. They worked together during the day and spent their evenings planning their future. Jake also began to find his faith again, though it looked different than it had before. Instead of formal church services, he found God in the work of his hands and in the love he shared with Martha. He realized that his sister's death had not been a sign that God did not exist, but that people sometimes failed to live up to God's expectations. One snowy evening in February, Jake and Martha sat by the fire in her kitchen. Martha was mending clothes while Jake read aloud from one of her books. Do you ever regret leaving the seminary? Martha asked. Jake thought about the question seriously. I regret that Rebecca died. I regret that I lost my faith for a while, but I do not regret the path that brought me to you. Maybe you were meant to be a different kind of minister, Martha suggested. Maybe your ministry is building barns and helping people instead of giving sermons. Jake smiled. Maybe you are right. Maybe I found my calling after all. As spring approached, they began planning their wedding. They decided to hold it in the barn, of course. Martha ordered a simple white dress from the catalog, and Jake bought a new suit with money he had earned doing odd jobs over the winter. The wedding invitations brought responses from across the territory. People wanted to meet the famous cowboy and see the barn that had become a symbol of hope and community spirit. 2 weeks before the wedding, Martha received a letter that made her cry with joy. It was from Jake's parents in Boston, who had learned about the wedding from the newspaper stories. They wrote that they were proud of their son and asked if they could come to the wedding. When Jake read the letter, he cried too. He had thought his family would never forgive him for leaving seminary and disappearing for 3 years. Now he realized they had never stopped loving him. Even when they did not understand his choices, everything was falling into place for their new life together. Martha's ranch was thriving, Jake had found his purpose, and their love was strong enough to build a future on. The barn that had started as a simple roof repair had become the foundation for a love story that would inspire people for generations. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and wildflowers bloomed across the prairie. People began arriving at the ranch early in the morning, coming by horse, wagon, and even on foot from nearby towns. Martha woke up feeling nervous and excited. Her sister Lucy had arrived the day before to help her get ready. "I have never seen you look so happy," Lucy said as she helped Martha put on her white dress. Meanwhile, Jake was getting ready in the bunkhouse with help from his father, who had traveled all the way from Boston. Jake's parents had arrived 3 days earlier, and Martha loved them immediately. They were kind, educated people who clearly adored their son. "I am proud of the man you have become," Jake's father said as he helped his son with his tie. "You found your own way to serve God and help people?" By noon, over 200 people had gathered in and around the barn. The building was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and someone had brought a piano for music. 3 different ministers had come to perform the ceremony: the local preacher, a minister from the next town over, and even a priest who had traveled from the Catholic mission. Martha walked down the makeshift aisle on the arm of her neighbor, Mr. Wilson, who had volunteered to give her away since her father had died years earlier. When she saw Jake waiting for her at the front of the barn, her heart filled with joy. He looked handsome in his new suit, and his smile was brighter than the sunshine streaming through the windows. The ceremony was simple but moving. Jake and Martha promised to love each other through good times and bad, to work together to build a life of purpose and service. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd cheered so loudly that it scared the horses outside. The celebration lasted all day and into the evening. People ate, danced, and shared stories about how Jake and Martha had touched their lives. Many told of small kindnesses Jake had done that no one had ever heard about before: fixing a widow's broken gate, teaching a young man to read, sharing his food with hungry travelers. As the sun set, Martha and Jake stood together in their barn, watching their friends and neighbors enjoy themselves. "Did you ever imagine this when you climbed onto my roof?" "That first day?" Martha asked. Jake shook his head in wonder. "I thought I was just fixing some broken boards. I had no idea I was starting a new life." But their story was just beginning. In the months after their wedding, letters continued to arrive from people across the country who had read about the cowboy and the barn. Many letters contained money, which Jake and Martha decided to use to help other struggling families. Jake had an idea. "What if we created a foundation to help homesteaders and small ranchers? We could provide loans without interest to people who need help getting started or staying on their land." Martha loved the idea. They established the Henderson Sullivan Foundation, using their barn as headquarters. Word spread quickly that help was available for people who needed it. Soon they were receiving applications from across the territory. Jake traveled to visit families who had applied for help, while Martha managed the paperwork and correspondence from home. They were careful to only help people who were genuinely trying to build honest lives, not those looking for easy money. Their first loan went to a young couple whose crops had been destroyed by hail. The second went to an elderly man whose horse had died, leaving him unable to work his small farm. Each loan came with an agreement that when the borrower was back on their feet, they would help the next person in need. The foundation's work caught the attention of wealthy people in eastern cities who wanted to support the effort. Donations began flowing in from unexpected sources, business owners, church groups, and even some government officials who admired what Jake and Martha were accomplishing. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped over 100 families. But more importantly, the idea was spreading. Communities across the West began organizing their own mutual aid societies. Inspired by the example set at the Henderson Ranch, Jake also began training young men in carpentry and construction skills. He taught them not just how to build, but how to serve their communities through their work. These young men became known as Sullivan's Boys, and they carried his methods and philosophy to new territories. In 1890, Martha gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Rebecca after Jake's sister. 2 sons followed in the next 4 years, Thomas and Samuel. The children grew up in the barn as much as in the house, playing among the tools and watching their father work. The barn itself became a place of pilgrimage. People traveled from far away just to see the building that had started the movement. Jake and Martha always welcomed visitors, serving meals and sharing their story with anyone who wanted to hear it. A photographer came in 1895 and took pictures of the barn and the family. These pictures were published in magazines across the country, making Jake and Martha famous throughout America. But fame did not change them. They continued to live simply and focus on helping others. In 1900, Jake began writing a book about his experiences. He called it Building More Than Barns: How Simple Acts of Kindness Can Change the World. The book became popular and inspired even more people to follow their example. As the years passed, Jake's health began to decline. The hard work and exposure to weather during his traveling years had taken a toll on his body. But he never complained and continued working as long as he was able. In 1910, Jake suffered a heart attack while helping a neighbor repair his roof. He died peacefully at home 3 days later, surrounded by Martha and their children. His last words were, "Take care of the barn, it still has work to do." Jake's funeral was held in the barn, of course. People came from across the country to pay their respects. The service lasted 3 hours as person after person stood to tell how Jake had changed their life or their community. Martha lived for 33 more years after Jake's death, continuing the foundation's work with help from their children. She became known as the Mother of the West for her tireless efforts to help struggling families. The foundation grew to operate in 12 states and helped establish over 400 community centers modeled after their barn. Each center served as a place for people to gather, worship, celebrate, and support each other through difficult times. When Martha died in 1943 at the age of 90, the barn was designated as a National Historic Landmark. The plaque placed beside the door read, "Sometimes the greatest architecture is built not with blueprints, but with faith." Today, the barn still stands exactly as Jake built it. Visitors can see the beautiful carved beams, the sturdy construction, and the wide spaces where so many people gathered over the years. A small museum in the loft tells the story of Jake and Martha and the movement they started. The Henderson Sullivan Foundation continues to operate, now run by the couple's great-grandchildren. Every year on their wedding anniversary, people gather in the barn to remember the cowboy and the widow who proved that one person's kindness can indeed change the world. The barn has been carefully preserved, but it is not just a museum piece. It is still used for weddings, church services, and community meetings, just as Jake and Martha intended. Children still play in the loft, couples still dance on the smooth wooden floor, and people still find hope and inspiration within its walls. Jake Sullivan started out as a hungry cowboy looking for work and a hot meal. Martha Henderson was a desperate widow facing the loss of everything she held dear. Neither could have imagined that their chance meeting would create a legacy that would outlast their own lives and inspire countless others to build something beautiful in a difficult world. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, one act of kindness at a time. Sometimes the most important construction we do is not building structures, but building connections between people and communities that will last for generations.